I'm going to address this video to you as if you are someone who is having to write a eulogy for somebody that you love. The first question I would ask you is, the person who's passed and you, are you people of faith? So are you believers in religion? And I think it really does make a difference. One of my family members has very strong faith, and he said to me when my dad passed, he said, "I don't know how people who have no faith, I don't know how they cope." Now, I wouldn't go quite that far. I have faith. My dad had faith. If you're thinking, well, I don't, and the person who's passed didn't, I don't think that's impossible then to write a eulogy by any means. If you have faith, that gives you a whole repertoire of words that you can fall back on, because there are words in the Torah, there are words in the Gospels, there are words in the Quran that have been used again and again and again for generations by people in the situation that you are in, trying to understand and deal with their grief and how to mark the passing and what to think about what comes next. So you have so many reference points of so much wisdom from people who've gone before, who've been dealing with the same thing as you. And I think that ties to something I think that a eulogy can do, which is, a eulogy is obviously about the person who has passed. So it's incredibly personal and should be unique. But at the same time, it's universal, because everyone in the room, everyone who's there, they are also mortal. They are going to someday die. They will know people who have died. They come from a long line of people who died. So death and grief are universal experiences. So a eulogy, a good eulogy, I think, should go from the unique to the universal and back again. And in terms of the way you write, what that does to the, for want of a better word, performance, this going from small to large has a profound effect on the audience. It actually leaves us with a sense of wonder and also satisfaction, because at the same time we are made to feel how small we are in the world compared to the vastness of universal experience, and then how special we are. And so that is something to bear in mind, that a eulogy, I think, should be both unique and universal. Okay, now, if you have faith, then that is part of that universality, that God created us and God has prepared a place for us after we die. If you don't have that, and if the person who's passed doesn't have that belief, well, I suppose you're still able to find universal elements in the way that person lived their life and what death means to everyone who's left behind. And I think one way of looking at that, if you're not going to talk about an afterlife and a spirit in that sense, well, one way to talk about it is the impact, if you like, that person lives on in memory. If you don't believe they live on in spirit, they live on in the memory of the lives of the people who they touched. And so you are able to expand out from the unique to the universal in a similar way, by talking about the connections, the human connections that person made throughout his or her life. But as I say, I think what you're able to do in a eulogy is to pick out the unique and to put it in the frame of the universal, and then go back to the unique and go back to the universal. And that is a very, very powerful rhetorical device. Okay. It also gives you a kind of framing when you're trying to think about what you're going to say, because you can basically talk in one of two terms. You can talk about the unique aspects of the person and the universal experience of grief and of missing somebody and of somebody passing. Okay, so that's my first point. Would be, whether you have faith or not, you can talk about what's happening right now in both those terms. There's something unique, there's something universal. Okay. In relation to that, I would say also, don't be afraid to borrow from better writers than you are. By that I mean, well, okay, as I said before, if you look to the scriptures, if you look to the Torah, you look to the Quran, you look to your holy book, you'll find great writing that helps you to understand what's going on. Or you can also look to poetry, music, literature. Now, here is where you can go again from the universal to the unique. If you can find particular lines from particular songs, particular poems that meant a lot to the person who's passed. So in the case of my dad, he was a very keen walker. There was a song by Ewan MacColl called The Manchester Rambler, which my dad loved. There's a line in that song, in the chorus, "I may be a wage slave on Mondays, but I am a free man on Sunday." And I said, well, look, my inheritance from my dad is his love of the outdoors. And when I go out on the moors and the hills, I'm a free man. And that's what I take from my dad. So it's that kind of universal, look, anyone can listen to that story, down to the unique. It was my dad's favourite, and I feel it as well. So you can look to the person who's passed away, favourite songs, favourite poems, favourite literature, favourite books, favourite, and think, okay, there's a wonderful line, in this, what this writer said about life or about death. There's a wonderful line there. Right, that's my universal element because somebody else said it. Now I'm going to personalise it, make it unique by relating it to the life of the person who's passed and giving my take on it. Because don't forget, when you're standing there giving a eulogy, this is your take. You're not basically, you're not a spokesperson. You're there to give your take upon the person who's passed and on what this moment means. Okay, a couple of other things. I think that you need to bring the person who's passed, you need to bring them to life for the people who are listening. And that means telling little stories, right? So you might think, okay, what are they? So in my dad's case, what people said to me about him again and again and again, he was a gentleman, he was kind, he was considerate. Okay, he was very loving. He also was incredibly hardworking and diligent, and he liked to get a job done and do it properly. Okay, my dad never said, that'll do, and finished halfway through. Okay, so there were these kind of recurring themes. I thought, okay, well, for each of these recurring themes, and I picked out 2, but you could pick out 3. But for each of these, I'm going to find a single moment where something happened that is typical. And how am I going to find it? Well, I'm going to think about my own memories of working with Dad, of being with my dad. So I'm going to think about my own memories, but I'm going to ask around the immediate family. And you could say to people, look, tell me what do you think of, what do you remember of the person who's passed? It's actually quite difficult to get them to put it into one sentence. Well, you could say, look, tell me about a typical moment where you go, oh yeah, that was typical of Dad that he did that. So tell me about a typical moment. So a single moment in time, because then it comes alive in a way that just listing somebody's qualities, he was kind, hardworking, loving, it's very generic. Whereas there was this moment when, okay, in the hospital, he said this. Okay, so you see what I mean? It brings it alive. And it means that also what's interesting is when you go from describing somebody's qualities to talking about a single moment when, it's actually easier to say. Yeah, it's easier to say that out loud because once you kind of drop into the story as the person who's speaking, that stuff is easier than formal prose. Come on to writing in a second. So telling that moment in a story is much easier, much more natural. And you as a speaker, you will relax once you get to that bit. And the audience will relax as well. Okay, so do that. Talk to people around you and identify, okay, single moment, which was typical of the person who passed. You'll get, hopefully, a few, and then you decide which ones to use. Within that, so you say you're telling a little story about a single moment in time. Try this. Try using dialogue. So, in this, give you an example. When my dad was very poorly toward the end, he was in hospital and he was dozing a little bit, drifting in and out of sleep while we were there. And my mum and my sister were there. They were talking quietly to themselves. And my niece comes in and she's quite loud. And she said, "Grandad." And my dad woke up and she said, "Grandad, do you know who I am?" Straight to the point. And my dad kind of opened his eyes and looked at her and said, "You're my beautiful granddaughter." So, yeah. So you see, by using the single moment in time, it brings a very vivid image to the people listening. But also by using the dialogue, by acting out the dialogue, again, it's so easy to say and it's so easy to hear, and it makes that really rich picture of the person you're talking about. Okay, so you have a sense of the key messages you want to get across about the person who's passed away. You have a sense of how that fits in from this kind of unique perspective out to the universal perspective, and you have some moments, some typical moments, which will work as little stories. So how do you actually sit down and write? Personally, in any form of public speaking, I put off the writing stage for as long as I possibly can. So things are I'm rehearsing them over and over and over in my head, talking them through, trying them in different ways before I sit down. Sometimes I'll write stuff down on paper and just sort of do a sort of bullet pointy type map of ideas early on. And then finally I do sit down at the keyboard and write something. And the really important thing, I can't stress how important this is, when you come to sit down at the keyboard, write like you speak. So as you're typing, say it out loud, or say it out loud first and then write it down. And don't try and abbreviate or compress or compact. So that little story, the little anecdote about my dad in hospital, write it out exactly as you'd say it. Don't try and summarize it down into a shorter version, because by summarizing it, you're compressing the language. You're ruining the pace and the rhythm and the feel of the words. So write it like you say it, and that means with repetition, because we repeat ourselves when we're talking aloud. Well, write it like that. What you should be able to do when you've written it down, you should be able to pick it up and read it aloud without a single hesitation, because the rhythm of the sentences will match the rhythm of your natural speaking voice. Okay. If you can't pick it up and read it out aloud straight away, if you have to pause and then no, you're not writing in your natural voice. So this is not a piece of writing, it's a piece of oral delivery. The notes that you write are simply there as your safety net. Okay. And then when you look down at them at that moment, you'll know exactly where you are because it's in your voice. Okay. Don't forget that you've got certain obligations. I think when you're giving a eulogy, so an easy way to start a eulogy is to thank the people who've come, and to say how much Dad or the person who's passed would have enjoyed seeing them. It's a lovely way to start a eulogy, and it relaxes you. Gets you over the first hurdle of the first 10 seconds where your heart rate might be, So plan to do that. It's a lovely way to open. And I think my last point on this would be, don't worry about it, because some things can never adequately be put into words. And the value of the person who's passed and the hole they leave in the lives of those who are left behind, you're never going to be able to put that into words perfectly. But I think by trying this approach I've laid out for you here, and then by standing up and being seen to try to put it into words, I think that says a lot. So I wish you the very best of luck. As I said in the post, if you'd like to follow this advice, please use the comments to ask questions. But if you'd like to follow this advice, please make a donation to the Yorkshire Air Ambulance, which was my dad's kind of preferred charity. All right. Thank you and good luck.